The blood rushed to my fingertips, making them tingle as I held the keycard in my hand. For a moment, I just stared at the little plastic rectangle that unlocked more than a door. It unlocked the life I had built with my own hands, away from the shadow of my family. Yet here I stood outside my own hotel, watching my sister plant herself like a gatekeeper at the entrance, her perfectly rehearsed sneer cutting through me the way it always had since we were children. My father's booming laughter floated through the glass doors, carried on the soft music spilling from inside the Grand Azure's grand lobby. That sound, it stabbed me, familiar and foreign all at once. The laugh that had once made me feel safe as a little girl now echoed like a reminder of just how far I had fallen in his eyes. Or rather, how far he believed I had fallen. And there he was, celebrating another birthday, surrounded by family and dignitaries, while I stood outside as though I were some unwanted solicitor. "You can't seriously think you're coming in," Vanessa whispered sharply, her tone dripping with condescension. She shifted her weight and adjusted her dress, a designer knockoff I recognized instantly. I remembered the real sketches my friend the designer herself had shown them to me over lunch last week. But Vanessa had always been good at pretending, good at making illusions look like reality. That was her survival. That was her game. "This is the Grand Azure Ellie," she hissed, lowering her voice further. "The tasting menu alone costs more than you make in a month." If only she knew. If only she understood that the tasting menu she flaunted as a barrier against me was one I had helped design myself, every plate, every pairing chosen alongside the Michelin-starred chef I had brought into my vision. "He's my father too," I said quietly, though steadier than I expected. Inside my clutch was a small envelope, heavier than it should have been. It contained the deed to a villa in Tuscany, one of the crown jewels of Azure Hospitality's global portfolio. A gift I had intended for my father, though I knew now he would never have expected something like that from me, the daughter he believed had failed him. I should probably tell you who I am, or rather, who I've become. My name is Eleanor. I'm 38 years old and I'm a hospitality entrepreneur. This, this is the story of how I reclaimed my place at a table I had built, a table I actually owned. My mother's sharp voice suddenly pierced through my thoughts, cold and dismissive as ever. "Eleanor, what are you doing here? We discussed this." No, they had discussed it. That morning I had received a text from her, blunt as a slap across the face. "Don't come to Dad's birthday. It's at the Grand Azure. You can't afford it. Don't embarrass us." For a fleeting second, my throat tightened as though I were still that little girl waiting for her mother's approval, hoping for a soft word that never came. But then I held up the envelope. I brought a gift. Vanessa barked out a laugh before my mother could speak. "What is it? A gift card to Olive Garden? Or maybe you scraped together enough tips from waiting tables to buy him something from the mall." Her words bit as they were meant to, but they didn't cut the way they once did. Not anymore. My mother's gaze swept me up and down, lingering on my clutch, her mouth twisting. It was handmade Italian leather, subtle, yet commanding, a piece that cost more than Vanessa's entire car. But of course my mother didn't see that. She saw only what she wanted to see. "Whatever it is," she said icily, "I'm sure your sister's gift is more appropriate. She just made junior partner at her firm, you know." Of course I knew. I knew everything. I knew that her firm, which they held up as the pinnacle of success, was struggling to secure a lease in one of my very own properties. A lease they needed desperately and could barely afford. My real estate division had sent me the reports just yesterday. As my mother continued her little speech listing Vanessa's accomplishments like badges on a uniform, I thought of my own life, the penthouse overlooking Central Park, the collection of rare sports cars, the private jet I had flown in on that morning without a second thought. But I kept silent, because to them I had always been trying. Vanessa smirked again. "That dress, Ellie. Couldn't you have at least made an effort? This is the Grand Azure, not some diner." I smoothed my hand across the silk of my black dress, custom made by one of Paris's most exclusive designers, the same designer who had turned Vanessa away the month before. I remembered my stylist chuckling as she told me about Vanessa's meltdown, and I nearly smiled at the irony. "It's what I could manage," I said softly. "Well, you can't come in," Vanessa snapped. "We reserved the entire VIP floor. It's for family and distinguished guests only." The VIP floor, my VIP floor, the one I had personally redesigned last year, selecting every chandelier, every piece of art. And who would those distinguished guests be? I asked, more out of curiosity than defiance. My mother waved her hand. Oh, you wouldn't know them. The Andersons, the Blackwoods, Mr. Harrison from the bank. All very important people. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. Thomas Anderson leased 3 of my properties. The Blackwoods had practically begged for a membership at one of my resorts. And Mr. Harrison's bank. They were currently petitioning for a loan from my investment group. Yes, I said lightly, very important indeed. My sister smirked, thinking she'd finally scored her point. Exactly. Which is why you can't be here. What would people think if they knew Dad's failure of a daughter was serving their drinks? The sting of those words hit me harder than I wanted to admit. Failure. Always the word they reached for. Always the label they hung around my neck like a chain. But I had learned to carry it, and tonight I was about to break it. Before I could answer, my brother-in-law Gavin appeared, straightening his tie. What's taking so long? Everyone's waiting for his voice cut off when he saw me. His expression collapsed into the same shock I'd seen countless times whenever people realized I wasn't the person they thought I was. Eleanor, he stammered. Didn't expect to see you here. Clearly not, I replied, watching my mother beam with pride as she announced Gavin's new promotion. He just made vice president at his bank. Junior vice president, I corrected softly. I knew because my finance team tracked every institution that touched our accounts. I knew because his bank was small, fragile, and one of the very ones we were preparing to acquire. Still more impressive than whatever you're doing, Vanessa cut in, her voice sharp. I thought of the board meeting I had left earlier that day, the one where we had discussed finalizing that very acquisition. I imagined the paperwork still sitting on my desk upstairs in the private office above this very hotel. Yes, I said quietly, something like that. Eleanor, my mother snapped. Just go. You're making a scene. I'll tell your father you couldn't make it. Couldn't afford it, you mean, Vanessa added with a laugh. I turned my gaze past them, past the glass doors, into the lobby of the Grand Azure. My hotel, my marble floors, my chandeliers, my artwork, my empire. For a moment I considered turning away, letting them have their illusions, letting them cling to their fragile hierarchy built on appearances and lies. But then I remembered something an old mentor had once told me. Success means nothing if you can't stand up for yourself. My jaw tightened, my shoulders straightened, the tingling in my fingertips stilled, replaced by a clarity that filled me from head to toe. Actually, I said softly, but with steel in my voice, I think I'll stay. And just as the words left my lips, the heavy glass doors swung open. Owen, my head of security, stepped out. He had been with me since the very beginning, since my first struggling hotel 7 years ago. Together we had built the foundation that had become the Azure Empire. His loyalty was unshakable, his presence reassuring. Is everything all right here, Madam CEO? His voice was clear, carrying over the marble steps. Your usual table is ready, and Chef Michel has the new menu tasting prepared for your approval. The silence that followed was deafening. Vanessa's jaw dropped. My mother clutched the door handle for support, her face drained of color. Owen's timing had always been impeccable. I smiled. Perfect timing. My family was just explaining to me how I couldn't afford to dine here. Ma'am, he said, puzzled, but you own the entire hotel chain. And with that, the truth long hidden shattered the illusion. The air seemed to freeze in place as Owen's words echoed across the entrance. For years, my family had clung to their carefully constructed image of me, Eleanor, the disappointment, the daughter who had rejected the safety of the family firm to play at hospitality. And in a single moment, that image shattered into dust. Yes, I said, my voice calm but carrying the weight of a decade of silence. I do own the hotel. In fact, I own all 35 Grand Azure hotels across 3 continents. Vanessa's clutch slipped from her fingers, hitting the marble with a clatter. She stared at me as though seeing me for the first time, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. My mother's hand trembled against the brass door handle, her knuckles white, her carefully composed face crumbling into disbelief. This is some kind of joke, Gavin finally blurted, his voice rising with desperation. She's just a restaurant manager. Owen adjusted his stance, his deep voice steady and professional. Miss Eleanor is the founder and CEO of Azure Hospitality Group. She built this chain from the ground up. She doesn't just manage restaurants, she owns entire resorts, properties, and hotels worth billions. Billions. The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. My family, so used to measuring worth by salaries, promotions, and secondhand prestige, couldn't process the scale of it. For them, success was a corner office or a title in a law firm. For me, it had become skylines and global markets. I stepped past them, the sound of my heels sharp against the marble. As I entered the lobby, every member of staff straightened to attention. "Good evening, Miss Eleanor," my front desk manager called warmly. "The executive suite is prepared for your father's birthday celebration." The staff didn't just acknowledge me, they respected me, and not out of fear, but because I had built this empire alongside them. I had scrubbed kitchens, walked construction sites, worked the front desk on holidays to understand what true hospitality meant. They had seen me, the real me, long before my family ever would. I turned back, my family still frozen in the doorway. "Shall we go inside after all the VIP floor is waiting?" Their silence was almost delicious. As we moved through the grand lobby, the chandeliers glittered above us, casting prisms of light across the marble I had chosen myself. Every corner whispered my story, every decision, every sacrifice, every battle fought alone without their approval. Staff greeted me by name, smiles, genuine voices warm. Each greeting was a reminder I belonged here. This was mine. My mother finally found her voice, brittle and breaking. "Your dress." She stared at it as though seeing it differently now. "Custom made in Paris," I said softly. "Around 30,000, I believe. But I admit I have a terrible habit of not checking price tags anymore." Her lips pressed together, her disbelief morphing into something darker, fear. I led them to the private elevator. With deliberate grace, I pulled the special key from my clutch and inserted it. The doors opened silently, as though bowing to me, carrying us into the heart of my empire. Inside, Vanessa fumbled for composure. "That dress?" She snapped, her voice trembling. It can't be exclusive. I saw something similar. The real Valentino collection hasn't even been released yet." I cut in smoothly. "I attended the private showing last month. Yours, however—" My eyes flicked to her knockoff. "It seems less authentic." Her face flushed crimson. The elevator doors opened directly into the VIP lounge, revealing the full celebration. The room buzzed with laughter, crystal glasses, clinking music floating elegantly through the air. Conversations died mid-sentence as heads turned and eyes locked on me. And then my father rose. "Eleanor." His voice trembled with confusion, his once commanding presence faltering. "What are you doing here?" "Your mother said she said you couldn't afford it." I walked forward, my steps unhurried, steady, my voice a blade wrapped in velvet. "Happy birthday, Dad. I hope you don't mind that I'm crashing the party in my own hotel." Gasps rippled across the room. Guests glanced at each other, whispers buzzing like electricity. Mr. Harrison from this bank pushed forward, his expression alight with relief. "Miss Eleanor, I had no idea you were Robert Thompson's daughter. We've been trying to secure a meeting with you for months regarding that loan." Thomas Anderson followed quickly, his voice reverent. "The mysterious CEO, Robert, your daughter, is the one buying up prime real estate across the city." All eyes turned to my father. His face drained of color, his posture sinking as though the weight of truth crushed the very air out of him. "All this time," he whispered, "we thought you were just a glorified waitress." Your words, I reminded him, my tone even, from the day I left the family firm to pursue hospitality. My mother clutched her pearls, trembling. "But why didn't you tell us? Why keep this a secret?" I looked at her steadily, my heart pounding, my voice unwavering. "Would you have believed me? You didn't believe in me 10 years ago when I needed you most. Why would I share my success with people who only measure worth by the size of a bank account?" I paused, my gaze sweeping the room, lingering on every guest who had once ignored me. Though by that metric, I suppose I am worth more than everyone here combined. The room went still. Vanessa collapsed into a chair, her face pale. Gavin's hand shook as he pulled out his phone, his mind already racing toward damage control. My mother blinked rapidly, caught between tears and excuses. And then, with deliberate calm, I pulled the envelope from my clutch and set it on the table before my father. "The gift you wouldn't let me give you," I said quietly. "It's the deed to a villa in Tuscany. Consider it a birthday present from your failure of a daughter." The silence cracked open into chaos. Guests swarmed, eager to speak with me, eager to rewrite the roles they had once assigned. The Blackwoods practically begged for a resort membership. Mr. Harrison pressed me about the loan. Even those who had ignored me at family gatherings now leaned forward with sudden interest. Through it all, my family sat frozen in their unraveling illusions. Vanessa's fiancé quietly slipped away once he realized her golden future depended on a lease she couldn't secure. Gavin's phone calls grew frantic as he realized the bank he worked for was under my consideration for acquisition. My mother alternated between weeping and loudly proclaiming to anyone who would listen that she had always believed in me. But I remembered. I remembered every text, every dismissive laugh, every moment they treated me like an embarrassment. And I knew no matter how they rewrote the past, I had finally seized the truth they could never take away. Later, as the evening waned, I found my father alone on the terrace, his shoulders slumped, his gaze fixed on the city skyline. The buildings glittered like jewels against the night. "How many of those do you own?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Enough," I answered, stepping beside him, "including the one that houses the family firm." He nodded slowly, the admission weighing heavily on him. "I was wrong about you, Eleanor. So terribly wrong." "Yes," I said simply, "you were." His eyes glistened as he turned to me. "Can you ever forgive us?" I let the silence stretch, the weight of decades pressing between us. Finally, I spoke. "Forgiveness isn't the issue, Dad. Respect is. You never respected my choices. You only respect success after it's proven. And now you can tell people your daughter owns the Grand Azure. That should be enough to satisfy your conversations." He looked away, the city lights reflecting off his weary face. And for the first time in my life, I felt taller than him. I left my father standing on that terrace, swallowed by the glow of the skyline and the echoes of his own regret. I didn't wait for an answer. For years, I had bent myself into shapes that might fit their mold, prayed that even a fragment of my achievements would earn a sliver of his pride. But standing there, feeling the night breeze sweep over me, I realized something fundamental: his validation was no longer my currency. I had built my own. When I stepped back into the lounge, the entire atmosphere had shifted. Where once there had been whispers and laughter directed away from me, there was now silence that bent in my direction, conversations orbiting my presence. Men and women who had barely remembered my name at previous family gatherings now leaned forward eagerly, each of them calculating, each wanting a piece of what they had suddenly learned was mine. "Miss Eleanor." Mr. Harrison pressed again if we could finalize a time to discuss the loan package. "Thomas," another guest, interrupted, "your real estate expansion, we'd love to collaborate." Their voices overlapped, a chorus of opportunism. I could see it all too clearly. Their sudden reverence was not for me but for the empire I commanded. For a fleeting second, I felt a pang of the loneliness that had carried me through those years of building alone. Even now in triumph, the people pressing closest weren't here because they believed in me. They were here because I was useful. And yet for once, that truth didn't sting. Because unlike my family, these people's approval didn't matter. They would come and go as investors always did, as social climbers always had. But my work, my vision, that remained. At the head of the table, my mother sat stiffly, her pearls trembling against her chest as she whispered frantic explanations to the Andersons. Of course, we always knew she was destined for something big. We supported her in spirit. You know, she was always so independent. Her words were daggers disguised as compliments, rewriting the story while the ink was still drying. I caught Vanessa's eye across the room. She looked hollow, her skin pale beneath the layers of makeup, her mouth pressed into a thin, trembling line. For years she had been the golden child, the one lifted high on the pedestal of family pride. Now that pedestal had cracked beneath her feet, and she was scrambling for balance in the rubble. "You always wanted to be the star." I thought, my gaze steady on her. "And now that the spotlight has shifted, you don't know how to stand in the dark." The thought was neither cruel nor vengeful, it was simply true. Her fiancé, once glued to her side, was nowhere to be seen. I imagined him outside, dialing contacts, recalculating his future now that Vanessa's glittering promises had turned to smoke. And Gavin, poor Gavin, was still glued to his phone, his forehead damp, as if by sheer force of will, he could call back the stability already slipping from his grasp. I excused myself from the eager guests and moved toward the far end of the lounge. As I walked, I could feel every pair of eyes on me, some envious, some calculating, a few perhaps even admiring. But I didn't quicken my step. I had learned through years of dismissals and doubting stares that the slow walk of certainty was more powerful than 100 shouted explanations. I poured myself a glass of wine from the bar and let the silence of that corner envelop me. The first sip was sharp grounding, and for the first time that evening I allowed myself to breathe. My mind drifted back to the early days, the cramped apartments, the cheap rented office where I had sketched out my first hotel concept on napkins and scraps of paper. The years I had eaten instant noodles just to save enough to fund one more renovation. The countless rejections from investors who told me hospitality was too cutthroat, too risky, that I should return to the safety of the family firm. I thought about the first hotel I bought, a crumbling, near-bankrupt property on the edge of the city. Everyone told me it was a mistake. My father had laughed when he found out, told me I'd sunk what little I had into a doomed venture. But I had seen possibility where others saw ruin. I remembered scrubbing floors with the housekeeping team, greeting guests at the desk with a smile, even when my body ached, learning the language of hospitality from the inside out. And when that first hotel turned around, when guests began returning, when reviews spoke of warmth and elegance, I had tasted a victory my family could never have understood. From that single seed had grown the Azure Empire. And yet here I stood in the most beautiful of them all, surrounded by marble I had chosen. Chandeliers I had approved, staff I had trained, and my own family had barred me from entering. The irony was almost poetic. As the evening wound down, I slipped away from the guests, taking the private elevator up to my office at the very top of the hotel. The space was quiet, overlooking the city like a throne over its kingdom. I sank into the leather chair behind my desk, the same chair where hours earlier I had signed off on contracts that would change the landscape of the industry. My hands rested on the smooth wood of the desk, and for the first time that night, I let the tears come. Not tears of pain, not entirely, but tears of release, of recognition, of exhaustion from carrying the weight of being misunderstood for so long. I thought about little Eleanor, the girl who had once sat in her father's office at the accounting firm balancing numbers on a calculator, desperate for him to notice. I thought about the young woman who had walked away from that office 10 years ago with nothing but a stubborn heart and a dream she couldn't name. And now this woman, 38 years old, owner of 35 hotels, sitting in her own tower while the city glittered below. I wondered if I had finally proven enough, or if deep down I still longed for a kind of love and respect that could never be purchased, never earned with balance sheets or square footage. The truth settled heavy in my chest. Their approval was not the victory I had sought all along. My victory was this, the life I had carved out for myself even when no one believed in me. I leaned back, staring at the skyline, and whispered into the silence, I made it. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Morning light spilled into my office, pale and golden, stretching across the mahogany desk where contracts and reports still lay. I had fallen asleep there, head resting on folded arms, lulled by the quiet hum of the city below. When I awoke, the world outside had already shifted. The celebration downstairs was over. The glasses cleared, the laughter faded. What remained was the echo of truths laid bare. I sat upright, brushing stray strands of hair from my face, and gazed out the window. The skyline glittered in the early dawn. For years, those towers had felt like fortresses that kept me out. Now they stood as monuments to everything I had built. My empire wasn't just glass and steel, it was the proof of my survival. Proof that I had carved a place for myself, even when the people who should have believed in me the most turned their backs. The soft knock at the door startled me. When I called out, Owen stepped in, carrying a tray with coffee and a quiet steadiness that had become my anchor over the years. "Rough night?" he asked, setting the tray before me. I nodded faintly. "You could say that." He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Your family is still here." Of course they were. The moment their illusions cracked, they would cling to whatever pieces remained. The realization didn't bring anger, it brought a weary sort of understanding. For so long, they had believed in an image of me so small, so diminished, that confronting the truth was like staring into the sun. When I finally descended to the lounge, they were waiting. My mother rose first, pearls still hanging like chains at her throat. Her face was drawn, eyes red from sleeplessness. Alanar, she said softly, almost pleading. We didn't know. I tilted my head, my voice quiet but edged with steel. You didn't want to know. She flinched but said nothing. Vanessa sat slumped in her chair, her usual sharpness blunted by the reality pressing down on her. Her fiancé had indeed vanished, leaving her alone in a storm she had never prepared for. Her eyes flicked to mine, wide and uncertain. For the first time in years, she wasn't my tormentor. She was just small. Why didn't you tell us? She whispered, her voice cracking. All these years, why hide it? I inhaled slowly, my gaze steady, because it wasn't about hiding. It was about surviving, about building without having to prove myself every step of the way to people who dismissed me before I even began. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument we had ever had. My father finally spoke, his voice low, stripped of its former power. I was wrong. About you, about everything. I thought leaving the family firm meant betrayal. I see now. It was the bravest thing you could have done. For a moment I searched his eyes, looking for sincerity. What I found was regret, deep and raw, but regret alone was not enough. Bravery isn't what you saw, I said quietly. You saw defiance. You saw failure, and you made sure I carried those words like chains. I exhaled. But you don't get to rewrite that part. You don't get to claim now that you always believed in me. He bowed his head as though my words were a verdict he could not escape. I set the Tuscany deed envelope on the table between us. That gift, it wasn't meant to impress you. It was meant to show you that even when you tried to make me small, I became something bigger than you ever imagined. My mother's hand trembled as she reached toward it but stopped short, her fingers curling in hesitation. Vanessa stared at it as though it were a mirror reflecting everything she had lost. I don't need your approval anymore, I continued. My voice wavered, but I held firm. I never really did. What I needed was respect. And since I'll never get it from you, I learned to build it for myself. The room was silent, the truth ringing louder than any applause or argument. I turned, my heels clicking against the marble floor, and walked toward the lobby. Staff smiled warmly as I passed, offering greetings, their respect genuine, built from years of working together. They were my true family, the people who had stood by me not because of blood, but because they believed in the vision I fought for. Outside, the city was alive, bustling with morning energy. I paused on the steps, lifting my face to the sky. For the first time in years, I felt unburdened. I thought about the little girl who had begged for her father's approval, the young woman who had left everything behind to chase a fragile dream, and the woman standing here now, scarred but unbroken. The lesson crystallized in me, sharp and clear. Family may try to define you, diminish you, even break you, but their vision of you is not your destiny. You define yourself. You build your own place at the table, even if you have to construct the table with your bare hands. I smiled, a slow, quiet smile that belonged only to me. Tonight, I had reclaimed my place, but more than that, I had reclaimed myself, and that was worth more than their approval could ever be. If you've stayed with me through this story, thank you. My journey is just one among many, but perhaps it reminds you of your own strength, your own power to rise, even when those closest to you doubt you. If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe. And leave me a comment. I'd love to hear if you've ever had to fight to reclaim your place at the table.